There is a moment in many painful relationships when you stop asking, how do I make this person love me? And you finally begin asking, why have I been working so hard to earn something that should have been freely given? That question can change everything, because sometimes the most confusing relationship is not the one where there is no love at all. It is the relationship where there are just enough beautiful moments to keep you hoping, just enough affection to keep you attached, just enough promises to keep you waiting, and just enough pain to keep you wondering what you are doing wrong. Maybe you have experienced that confusion. Maybe you have sat alone after an argument, replaying the entire conversation in your mind. Maybe you wondered whether you were too emotional. Maybe you apologized just to restore peace, even though you were the one who had been hurt. Maybe you learned to study their facial expressions, their texting patterns, their silence, their tone of voice, because somehow their emotional state became the weather system around which your entire life had to operate. And perhaps the hardest part is that you cannot explain why you are exhausted. From the outside, everything may look normal. Other people may see photographs, dinners, vacations, laughter, gifts, affectionate messages, and moments of chemistry. But you know what happens behind closed doors. You know the emotional whiplash. You know how quickly warmth can become contempt. You know how a simple disagreement can somehow become an indictment of your entire character. So today, I want you to slow down. I want you to stop judging yourself for staying. I want you to stop calling yourself weak because you became attached to someone who repeatedly confused you. And I want you to understand something important. Recognizing narcissistic traits is not about diagnosing your partner from a distance. It is about recognizing patterns that may be psychologically harmful to you. There is a difference between someone who occasionally behaves selfishly and a relationship characterized by a persistent pattern of entitlement, manipulation, lack of accountability, emotional exploitation, or disregard for your boundaries. People can have narcissistic traits without meeting the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. And even if you never know the exact label, you still have the right to respond to behavior that is hurting you. That distinction matters because you do not need a clinical diagnosis to justify your pain. You do not need a professional to declare, yes, this person is a narcissist, before you are allowed to say, this relationship is unhealthy for me. You do not need courtroom evidence to establish that your nervous system has been living in survival mode. And you do not need their agreement before you take yourself seriously. The first sign can be something you barely notice at the beginning. You start walking on eggshells. You may not even realize it at first. You simply become more careful. You think before sending a text. You edit your words. You avoid certain topics. You learn that bringing up an unmet need can produce an argument. You discover that disagreeing may result in hours of silence. You notice that if they are already irritated, you have to become smaller, softer, quieter, more accommodating. Eventually, you are no longer simply communicating with your partner. You are managing your partner, and there is a tremendous difference. In a healthy relationship, you should not have to become a professional emotional weather forecaster. You should not have to walk into the room and immediately scan someone's face to determine whether you are safe to speak. You should not have to calculate whether telling the truth will result in punishment. Of course, every relationship has difficult days. Every human being has moods. Every couple has misunderstandings. But when unpredictability becomes the organizing principle of the relationship, your body can begin adapting to it. You become hypervigilant. You notice changes in tone. You notice delayed replies. You notice when affection disappears. You notice when their compliments suddenly become criticism. You notice when they are looking for a fight. And eventually, you begin believing that preventing their reaction is your responsibility. That is where something deeply damaging can happen. You stop asking, "What do I need?" and begin asking, "What do I need to do?" so they don't get upset. Think about how profound that shift is. Your life begins revolving around someone else's emotional regulation. And you may call that love. You may call it loyalty. You may call it patience. But sometimes what looks like patience from the outside is actually self-abandonment from the inside. The second sign is that the relationship increasingly revolves around them. Their problems become emergencies. Your problems become inconveniences. Their emotions deserve explanation. Your emotions require justification. They expect you to listen. But when you speak, they may interrupt, dismiss, redirect, compare, or somehow turn the conversation back toward themselves. You tell them you had a difficult day, and within minutes you are comforting them. You express hurt, and suddenly you are defending why you had the right to be hurt. You ask for consideration, and suddenly you are selfish. You ask for accountability, and suddenly you are attacking them. You say, "That really hurt me." And instead of curiosity, you get, "Well, you hurt me first." This is one of the patterns that can leave people emotionally starving inside a relationship. Because emotional intimacy is not simply being physically close to someone. Emotional intimacy involves curiosity. It involves reciprocity. It involves the ability to say, "Tell me more. I want to understand what happened inside you." But when one person's emotional world constantly dominates the relationship, the other person can become an audience, a caretaker, a therapist, a source of reassurance, or a stabilizer. And you may begin wondering why you feel lonely while technically being in a relationship. That loneliness is real. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being emotionally unseen by someone who is physically beside you. You can sleep next to someone and still feel alone. You can receive gifts and still feel unseen. You can be told, "I love you," and still feel emotionally unsafe. You can have chemistry and still lack intimacy. And that distinction is critical because narcissistic dynamics can sometimes be confusing. precisely because they are not painful every second. There may be extraordinary moments. There may be intense chemistry. There may be passionate declarations. There may be periods when you think, this is finally the person I hoped they would become. And then something changes. The criticism returns. The withdrawal returns. The entitlement returns. The coldness returns. The accusations return. And you start chasing the version of the relationship that appeared during the good periods. This leads us to another important sign, the push-pull cycle. Sometimes affection is abundant. Sometimes it disappears. Sometimes they want you constantly. Sometimes they act as though your existence is an inconvenience. Sometimes they praise you. Sometimes they demean you. Sometimes they tell you that you are the most important person in their life, and later they may treat you as though you are replaceable. This inconsistency can create a powerful attachment because the brain responds strongly to unpredictability. Intermittent reinforcement can make people work harder for rewards precisely because they do not know when the reward will come. Think about a slot machine. You do not keep pulling the lever because you win every time. You keep pulling because you might win. In an unhealthy relationship, affection can sometimes function similarly. You do not know when the warm version of the person will return. So you wait. You try harder. You become more understanding. You forgive again. You explain yourself differently. You become more attractive, more successful, more patient, more sexual, more available, more agreeable. You think, maybe if I become the right version of myself, the good relationship will become permanent. But listen carefully. You cannot consistently earn healthy love by performing perfectly for someone who is committed to an unhealthy relational pattern. You can become more beautiful, more successful, more patient, more educated, more generous, and more understanding, and still not receive the emotional safety you deserve. Because the problem may not be that you are failing to communicate. The problem may be that the other person benefits from the imbalance. Now let's talk about accountability. This is one of the most important signs. Every human being makes mistakes. A healthy partner can say, I was wrong. A healthy partner can say, I understand why that hurt you. A healthy partner can tolerate the discomfort of knowing they caused pain without immediately making you responsible for their discomfort. A concerning pattern occurs when accountability repeatedly becomes impossible. You bring up what happened. They explain why it happened. You describe the impact. They discuss your reaction. You ask for an apology, they give you an excuse. You ask for changed behavior. They promise something vague. Then the cycle repeats. And eventually you realize you have been having the same conversation for months or years. You are not having one argument. You are living inside a pattern. That distinction can awaken you. Because when you keep trying to solve a pattern with a single conversation, you can exhaust yourself. You keep thinking, maybe I haven't explained it clearly enough. So you explain it again and again and again. You find articles, you send messages, you give examples. You cry, you write long paragraphs, you ask them to understand. You beg them to see your heart. And they may respond by telling you that you are dramatic. This is where emotional detachment becomes powerful. Detachment does not mean becoming cruel. It does not mean pretending you never cared. It does not mean becoming narcissistic yourself. Detachment means you stop making your peace dependent on someone else's willingness to validate your reality. You can say, I know what I experienced. You can say, I know what I will accept. You can say, I don't need to convince you that my boundary is reasonable. That is freedom. And perhaps the most difficult lesson is this. Sometimes closure does not come from the conversation you are waiting to have. Sometimes closure comes from accepting the pattern you have already witnessed. You may be waiting for the perfect apology. You may be waiting for them to finally admit everything. You may be waiting for them to explain why they did it. You may be waiting for them to say, you were right. I hurt you. I understand now. And maybe one day they will. But your healing cannot depend on that possibility. Because if your healing requires their confession, they still control your healing. Your power begins returning when you realize that you can acknowledge what happened even if they deny it. The next sign is manipulation. Manipulation is not simply persuasion. Relationships involve influence all the time. We ask each other for things. We negotiate. We compromise. Manipulation becomes concerning when someone's tactics repeatedly undermine your autonomy through guilt, fear, deception, punishment, pressure, or emotional coercion. Maybe they threaten to leave every time you establish a boundary. Maybe they accuse you of not loving them whenever you say no. Maybe they compare you to someone else to provoke jealousy. Maybe they bring another person into conflicts to make you feel replaceable. Maybe they suddenly become affectionate when they sense you pulling away. Maybe they become cold when you stop giving them what they want. Maybe they tell you nobody else would put up with you. Maybe they tell you, you're lucky to have me. Maybe they repeatedly make you feel that your needs are unreasonable. And slowly something happens. You begin negotiating against yourself. You say no, then immediately feel guilty. You set a boundary, then apologize for setting it. You express discomfort, then explain why they should not be angry. You become so focused on maintaining the relationship that you stop maintaining yourself. That is the moment to pause. Ask yourself, what happens when I disagree? Not when everything is going well. What happens when you say no? What happens when you need something? What happens when you are disappointed? What happens when you tell the truth? What happens when you stop over-functioning? Those moments reveal much more about a relationship than romantic promises ever will. Another sign is that you begin doubting your own reality. Maybe you remember a conversation differently. They insist it never happened. You remember the promise. They insist you misunderstood. You remember the insult. They tell you they were joking. You remember the pattern. They tell you that you are obsessed with the past. Again, not every disagreement about memory is gaslighting. Human memory is imperfect. Couples can genuinely remember events differently. But persistent manipulation of your perception is different. If someone repeatedly denies things they said, rewrites events, attacks your credibility, uses your emotional reactions as evidence that your perception is invalid, and leaves you chronically confused about what you experienced that deserves attention. And this can be incredibly destabilizing because you may begin keeping notes, you may take screenshots, you may replay conversations, you may ask friends, "Am I crazy?" You may think, "Maybe I really am too sensitive, and I want you to hear this clearly." Being emotionally affected by mistreatment does not automatically mean you are irrational. Your tears are not proof that your perception is wrong. Your anger is not proof that your boundary is wrong. Your sensitivity is not automatically a character flaw. Sometimes your emotional response is information. It may be telling you that something inside you has been violated repeatedly. Your body can recognize a pattern before your conscious mind has language for it. You may feel exhausted before you can explain why. You may become tense when your partner's name appears on your phone. You may feel relief when they leave the room. You may find yourself emotionally preparing before every difficult conversation. These responses do not diagnose your partner, but they can tell you something about your experience. And your experience matters. Another important sign is how they respond to boundaries. Boundaries are not punishments. A boundary is not, "You must behave exactly as I demand." A boundary is, "If this behavior happens, this is what I will do to protect myself." For example, if you begin insulting me during an argument, I will end the conversation and revisit it when we can speak respectfully. That is a boundary. If you continue insulting me, you will regret it. That is a threat. Healthy relationships can negotiate boundaries. Unhealthy relationships may treat boundaries as betrayal. You say, "I need some space." They say, "You're abandoning me." You say, "I'm not comfortable with that." They say, "You don't trust me." You say, "I will not stay in a conversation where I'm being insulted." They say, "You're controlling me." Notice what can happen. Your boundary becomes the problem. Your attempt to protect your emotional health becomes evidence against you. And eventually you may stop having boundaries because every boundary creates conflict. But when you abandon your boundaries to prevent someone else's reaction, you pay for peace with pieces of yourself. And that price becomes too expensive. You were not born to spend your entire life managing someone else's anger. You were not placed on this earth to prove your worth to someone who constantly moves the finish line. You do not have to audition for basic respect. You do not have to win the right to have feelings. You do not have to become perfectly calm before your pain becomes legitimate. And you do not have to remain in a relationship simply because you once loved the person. Love matters. But love alone does not make a relationship safe. Compatibility matters. Respect matters. Accountability matters. Emotional reciprocity matters. Trust matters. And perhaps most importantly, your sense of self matters. So let's talk about what happens when you finally recognize these patterns. Because recognition is only the beginning. The next chapter is not revenge. It is not proving them wrong. It is not making them jealous. It is not becoming successful just so they regret losing you. Those things may feel emotionally satisfying for a moment, but they can keep your attention psychologically attached to the person you are trying to escape. Real freedom is quieter. Real freedom is waking up and realizing you no longer need them to understand your decision. Real freedom is not checking whether they viewed your story. Real freedom is not monitoring who they follow. Real freedom is not asking mutual friends what they said about you. Real freedom is not creating a perfect life as a performance for the person who hurt you. Real freedom is building a life that no longer revolves around their reaction. And this is where no contact can become meaningful. No contact is not a manipulation tactic. It should not be used as a way to make someone chase you. It is not a psychological trick designed to force an apology. It is a boundary that can create space between you and a damaging relational pattern. For some people, no contact may be necessary because continued interaction repeatedly reactivates the cycle. For others, especially when children, work, finances, or legal responsibilities are involved, complete no contact may not be realistic. In those circumstances, structured communication, limited contact, written communication, or other safety-focused approaches may be more appropriate. The principle is not the label. The principle is protection. You are protecting your emotional bandwidth. You are protecting your clarity. You are protecting your ability to heal. Because every time you re-enter the cycle, you may find yourself pulled back into explaining, defending, arguing, hoping, and waiting. And healing often requires space from the stimulus that keeps reopening the wound. Imagine trying to heal a cut while repeatedly tearing the skin open. You would not call that weakness. You would call it an injury that has not been allowed to heal. The same principle can apply emotionally. You need space to experience your own thoughts without their voice drowning them out. You need mornings when you are not wondering whether they are angry. You need evenings when you are not analyzing the meaning of a text. You need conversations where you do not have to defend your right to exist. You need relationships where your nervous system can breathe. And when you first step away, do not be surprised if you miss them. Missing someone does not mean leaving was wrong. Missing someone means you formed an attachment. You can miss someone and still know they were unhealthy for you. You can love someone and still choose distance. You can remember beautiful moments and still acknowledge destructive patterns. You can grieve the relationship without returning to it. This is one of the hardest lessons in healing. Your emotions do not always tell you what decision is healthy. Sometimes your emotions tell you what you are grieving. There is a difference. You may miss the person. You may also be missing the future you imagined. You may be grieving the version of them you hoped would become permanent. You may be grieving the relationship you thought you were building. You may be grieving the time you invested. You may be grieving the person you were before the relationship changed you. That grief deserves compassion. Do not shame yourself for it. You are not foolish because you hoped. You are human. You saw potential. You remembered the good. You believed promises. You wanted love to work. There is nothing shameful about that. But eventually, hope must become grounded in evidence, not promises. Evidence, not potential. Patterns, not what someone says during a crisis, what they consistently do when nobody is forcing them to change. Because behavior over time tells you more than 1,000 declarations. And perhaps you have been waiting for the person to become who they were at the beginning. But ask yourself honestly, was the beginning the pattern, or was it the exception? That question can be painful, especially if the beginning was extraordinary. Maybe they seemed to understand you better than anyone ever had. Maybe they showered you with attention. Maybe they said everything you had secretly wanted to hear. Maybe they made you feel chosen. Then the relationship changed. And you spent the rest of the relationship trying to get back to the beginning. That can become a psychological trap. Because you are no longer relating to the person in front of you, you are relating to the memory of the person you met. You are comparing today's behavior against yesterday's promises, and you keep waiting for the original version to return. But healthy love does not require you to live in the past. Healthy love evolves. It may face conflict. It may go through difficult seasons. But there is generally room for accountability, repair, compromise, and growth. So if you recognize yourself in these signs, do not immediately rush to label your partner. Instead, ask better questions. Do I feel respected? Do I feel safe expressing disagreement? Can I say no? Can I make mistakes without being humiliated? Can I talk about my feelings without becoming the villain? Does my partner take responsibility? Do their actions match their words? Can conflict end with repair? Do I feel more like myself in this relationship or less like myself? These questions bring the focus back where it belongs, on your lived experience. Because sometimes people become so obsessed with proving that someone is a narcissist that they forget to ask whether the relationship is good for them. The label is not the destination. Clarity is. And clarity means you stop debating whether you are allowed to be hurt. You stop comparing your pain to someone else's pain. You stop saying, maybe other people have it worse. Pain does not need to win a competition before it deserves attention. If something is consistently diminishing you, confusing you, frightening you, humiliating you, or eroding your sense of self, it matters. And perhaps the most powerful thing you can do is begin rebuilding your relationship with yourself. Because unhealthy relationships can create self-abandonment. You stop listening to your intuition. You stop trusting your preferences. You stop seeing friends. You stop pursuing goals. You stop laughing the way you used to. You stop wearing what you like because they criticize it. You stop speaking honestly because they punish honesty. You stop asking for things because you have learned that needs create conflict. Slowly, your personality becomes organized around avoiding consequences. Healing means reversing that process. Start small. Ask yourself what you actually like. What do you want to eat? What music do you enjoy? Who makes you feel safe? What activities make you feel alive? What did you love before you became consumed by this relationship? What dreams did you put away? What parts of yourself became quieter? You do not need to rebuild your entire life overnight. You simply need to begin returning to yourself, one decision at a time, one boundary at a time, one honest conversation with yourself at a time. And if you made mistakes, forgive yourself. Maybe you stayed too long. Maybe you ignored warning signs. Maybe you went back after promising yourself you wouldn't. Maybe you accepted apologies that were never followed by change. Maybe you gave chance after chance. Do not turn your healing into another courtroom where you prosecute yourself. You were doing the best you could with the information, attachment, hope, fear, and emotional resources you had at that time. Now you know more, and knowing more gives you the opportunity to choose differently. Your past decisions do not permanently define your future. You can learn, you can change, you can leave. You can stay with new boundaries if the situation is genuinely workable. You can seek therapy. You can talk to trusted people. You can build financial independence. You can strengthen your support system. You can create a safety plan if necessary. You can stop participating in conversations that are designed to destabilize you. You can choose peace without needing everyone to agree that you deserve it. And if there is abuse, intimidation, threats, stalking, or danger, please prioritize practical safety and seek appropriate professional or local support rather than confronting the person simply to prove a point. Your safety is more important than winning an argument. Remember that your safety is more important than closure. Your safety is more important than being understood. Your safety is more important than proving that you were right. Now, I want to speak to the person who keeps thinking, but what if they change? People can change, that is true. But change is not the same as promises. Change is not crying. Chant is not buying gifts. Chant is not a dramatic declaration. Chant is sustained behavior over time. It involves accountability. It involves insight. It involves willingness to tolerate discomfort. It involves respecting boundaries, even when those boundaries are inconvenient. It involves accepting consequences. It involves doing the work without demanding that the injured person immediately trust again. So you do not have to become cynical. You can remain hopeful about human growth while being realistic about your own limits. You can say, I hope you become healthier, but I cannot sacrifice myself waiting for it. That is not hatred. That is maturity. And perhaps the greatest transformation happens when you stop asking, how do I make them regret losing me? And start asking, how do I make sure I never lose myself again? That question changes your entire life because your goal is not to become unforgettable to them. Your goal is to become recognizable to yourself again. Your goal is not to make them jealous. Your goal is to become emotionally independent. Your goal is not to prove that you are better than their new partner. Your goal is to stop measuring your worth through comparison. Your goal is not to make them suffer. Your goal is to stop suffering in the same way. Your goal is not revenge. Your goal is recovery. And recovery can be remarkably quiet. It may look like sleeping peacefully. It may look like turning off your phone without anxiety. It may look like spending an afternoon without thinking about them. It may look like laughing with a friend and realizing you have not checked their social media all day. It may look like saying no without writing a 5-paragraph explanation. It may look like hearing criticism without immediately questioning your worth. It may look like trusting your intuition again. It may look like walking into a room and realizing you no longer need to read everyone's mood. It may look like being alone and discovering that solitude is not the same thing as abandonment. It may look like realizing that peace feels unfamiliar only because chaos became familiar. And that is an important part of healing. Sometimes healthy feels boring when your nervous system has become accustomed to unpredictability. Consistency may initially feel strange. Respect may feel unfamiliar. Someone who calmly accepts your no may feel almost suspicious. Someone who communicates directly may seem less exciting. Someone who does not make you chase may not trigger the same intensity. But intensity is not intimacy. Chemistry is not compatibility. Anxiety is not love. Jealousy is not devotion. Possessiveness is not protection. And emotional chaos is not proof that the connection is profound. Sometimes the healthiest love feels almost ordinary because your nervous system is no longer fighting for survival. That is what you deserve. A relationship where you can breathe. A relationship where you can disagree without fearing emotional punishment. A relationship where your needs are not treated like burdens. A relationship where apology is followed by change. A relationship where affection is not used as a bargaining chip. A relationship where you do not have to become smaller to make someone else feel larger. And if you are currently dating someone who displays some of these behaviors, remember that recognition does not require immediate panic. Slow down. Observe patterns. Talk to trusted people. Consider professional support. Document concerning incidents if doing so is safe and useful. Strengthen your boundaries. And most importantly, stop abandoning your own perspective. You are allowed to take your time. You are allowed to gather information. You are allowed to reconsider the relationship. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to stay while you work out your options. You are allowed to say, "This does not work for me." You do not need permission to protect your emotional health. And if you have already left, do not let a lonely evening rewrite the entire history of the relationship. Loneliness is temporary. The pattern was real. Missing them is temporary. Your need for safety remains. A moment of weakness does not erase your progress. If you return to contact, you have not failed. You have learned something. Begin again. If you check their profile, begin again. If you answer the message, begin again. If you cry over them, begin again. Healing is not a straight line. You are not required to become perfectly detached before you deserve peace. You simply keep moving toward yourself, and there will come a day when you realize something extraordinary. You will remember them without needing them. You will think about what happened without needing to rewrite it. You will understand that their behavior was about their patterns, not a measurement of your worth. You will stop asking why they could treat you that way, and you will start asking what you want your life to look like now. That is when the center of your story changes. You are no longer the person waiting for someone else to validate your pain. You become the person who validates yourself. You are no longer begging for basic consideration. You become the person who recognizes that respect is a requirement. You are no longer trying to convince someone to choose you. You become the person who chooses yourself. And choosing yourself does not mean becoming selfish. It means remembering that you are part of the relationship too. Your feelings count, your needs count, your time counts, your body counts, your dreams count, your peace counts, your future counts. There is a version of you that existed before this relationship. Maybe that person was confident. Maybe they laughed more. Maybe they trusted their instincts. Maybe they had dreams that became buried beneath the constant work of managing someone else's emotions. That person is not gone. They may simply be waiting for you to stop abandoning them. Come back to yourself. Come back slowly. Come back without shame. Come back without needing to explain it to everyone. Come back by sleeping. Come back by eating. Come back by exercising if that feels good. Come back through friendship. Come back through therapy. Come back through prayer if spirituality is meaningful to you. Come back through creativity. Come back through nature. Come back through learning. Come back through boundaries. Come back through silence. Come back through telling yourself the truth. And perhaps the truth is this: you were never too much for asking to be respected. You were never too sensitive for wanting honesty. You were never unreasonable for wanting consistency. You were never selfish for having boundaries. You were never unlovable because someone treated you poorly. Someone else's inability or unwillingness to provide healthy love is not a scientific measurement of your value. Do not confuse rejection with worth. Do not confuse abandonment with inadequacy. Do not confuse manipulation with chemistry. Do not confuse familiarity with destiny. And do not confuse the fact that you loved someone with the belief that you must remain available to them forever. Love can be real and still be insufficient for a healthy relationship. That may be one of the hardest truths to accept. You can genuinely love someone who is not good for you. You can understand their wounds and still refuse to be wounded by them. You can have compassion for their history and still hold them responsible for their behavior. You can hope they heal and still walk away. You can forgive and still maintain distance. You can wish them well without returning. That is emotional maturity. And eventually, your healing becomes less about what happened to you and more about what you choose next. What boundaries will you have now? What behavior will you no longer normalize? What will you pay attention to when dating someone new? Will you watch how they respond to no? Will you watch how they handle frustration? Will you watch how they speak about former partners? Will you watch whether their words match their actions? Will you observe whether they can apologize without turning the apology into an attack? Will you notice whether they are genuinely interested in your inner world? Will you notice whether you feel more relaxed or more anxious around them? These questions can protect you far more than trying to become an expert at detecting a narcissist within the first 5 minutes. People are complicated. Labels are imperfect. Parse matter, and your experience matters. So if you recognize these 10 warning signs, do not immediately think, I have to figure out how to defeat this person. Think, I have to figure out how to protect myself. That is the healthier direction. Because the goal is not to become better at fighting unhealthy people. The goal is to become better at recognizing what you will no longer participate in. The goal is not to develop a colder heart. The goal is to develop a clearer heart. You can remain loving without being exploitable. You can remain compassionate without becoming someone's emotional punching bag. You can remain generous without abandoning yourself. You can remain soft without becoming boundaryless. You can remain hopeful without ignoring evidence. That is strength. Real strength is not becoming emotionally numb. Real strength is becoming emotionally grounded. And when you become grounded, manipulation becomes harder to sustain because you no longer need another person's approval to know who you are. They can misunderstand you. You still know yourself. They can criticize you. You can evaluate the criticism without collapsing. They can withdraw. You can survive the silence. They can disagree. You do not have to betray yourself to restore harmony. They can say, you are selfish. You can ask, am I actually being selfish? Or am I finally refusing to overfunction? That question can save you because some people become accustomed to your overgiving. When you stop giving excessively, they may experience your healthy boundary as a dramatic change. But your boundary is not abuse simply because someone dislikes it. Your independence is not cruelty. Your self-respect is not arrogance. Your healing is not an attack. And your decision to protect your peace does not require a public announcement. You can quietly change your life. You can quietly stop answering. You can quietly seek support. You can quietly rebuild. You can quietly become someone who no longer participates in the cycle. And perhaps one day you will look back and realize that the most important person you rescued was not your younger self from the relationship. It was your future self from repeating it. That is what your healing can become. Not a war against another person. A commitment to yourself. A commitment that says, I will listen when my body tells me something feels wrong. I will take patterns seriously. I will not confuse potential with reality. I will not sacrifice my dignity to keep someone close. I will not chase someone who repeatedly demonstrates that they are unwilling to meet me with respect. I will not make another person's emotional instability the organizing principle of my life. I will not need to be chosen by someone who makes me feel disposable. I will choose myself again and again and again until choosing yourself no longer feels like an act of rebellion, until it simply feels normal. That is where you are going, not toward revenge, toward peace, not toward proving, toward knowing, not toward making them regret you, toward no longer regretting yourself, not toward becoming harder, toward becoming wiser, not toward shutting your heart, toward opening it only where safety, respect, honesty, and reciprocity exist. And if you are still in the relationship, take one thing from this message. You do not have to solve your entire future tonight. Take the next healthy step. Have the difficult conversation if it is safe. Set the boundary. Tell someone you trust. Stick professional support. Make a plan. Protect your finances and important documents if necessary. Think about what independence would look like. If children are involved, focus on their safety and stability too. If there is intimidation or danger, prioritize safety rather than confrontation. You do not need to perform strength. You need to practice it. And if you are already out, keep going. There may be days when you feel strong and days when you feel devastated. Both can exist. You can be healing and grieving at the same time. You can be proud of yourself and still miss them. You can know you made the right decision and still cry. None of those contradictions mean you are going backward. They mean you are human. Healing is not the disappearance of emotion. Healing is the development of choice. You still feel, but you no longer let every feeling dictate your behavior. You still remember, but you no longer let memory determine your future. You still care, but you no longer confuse caring with surrendering yourself. And eventually, something inside you becomes quiet. The questions become quieter. Why did they do this? Did they ever love me? Will they change? Do they miss me? Are they happier without me? Will they regret it? Those questions lose their power because a better question emerges. Am I becoming the person I want to be? And that is the question that can rebuild your life. So if you are dating someone and you recognize these patterns, listen to yourself. Do not diagnose impulsively. Do not ignore patterns either. Do not let labels become a distraction from your lived reality. You deserve relationships where respect does not have to be begged for. You deserve communication where disagreement does not become emotional warfare. You deserve affection that does not disappear as punishment. You deserve boundaries that can exist without retaliation. You deserve accountability. You deserve reciprocity. You deserve peace. And most importantly, you deserve to remain yourself while loving someone else. That is the standard, not perfection, not constant happiness, not a relationship without conflict, but a relationship where both people can remain human, where both people can be wrong, where both people can apologize, where both people can grow, where both people can say no, where both people can have needs, where both people can be heard, where love does not require one person to disappear so the other can feel powerful. So today, if you have been questioning yourself, take a breath. You do not have to decide everything in this moment, but stop abandoning your own voice. Listen to the quiet part of you that has been saying, something is not right. Listen without panic. Listen without shame. Listen without immediately defending the other person. Listen with curiosity. And then ask yourself the question that may matter more than any label. What is this relationship teaching me about what I will and will not accept? Maybe it is teaching you that chemistry is not enough. Maybe it is teaching you that boundaries matter. Maybe it is teaching you that your intuition deserves respect. Maybe it is teaching you that love without accountability can become painful. Maybe it is teaching you that you cannot rescue someone who refuses to participate in their own growth. Maybe it is teaching you that your peace has value. Whatever the lesson is, take it. Do not waste the pain. Let the pain become information. Let the confusion become clarity. Let the boundary become strength. Let the grief become wisdom. Let the ending, if there is an ending, become a beginning. And one day, you may look back at the version of yourself who stayed too long, and instead of saying, "How could I have been so stupid?" you will say, "You were trying to love. You were trying to believe. You were trying to make something work. And eventually, you learned how to love yourself too." That is the story worth telling. Not the story of how you defeated a narcissist. The story of how you stopped abandoning yourself. Not the story of how you made someone regret losing you. The story of how you learned that your value was never dependent on being chosen. Not the story of how you became colder. The story of how you became clearer. Not the story of how you won against someone. The story of how you came home to yourself. And when you come home to yourself, you no longer need to chase anyone. You no longer need to prove your worth. You no longer need to explain every boundary. You no longer need to beg someone to see your humanity. You know who you are. You know what you have survived. You know what you have learned. You know what you will never again normalize. And that knowledge becomes your protection. So remember these signs, but remember something even more important than the signs. Your life is bigger than this relationship. Your identity is bigger than what happened to you. Your future is bigger than the person who hurt you. There is still laughter ahead. There are friendships ahead. There are peaceful mornings ahead. There are opportunities ahead. There are versions of yourself you have not met yet. There are rooms you have not entered. There are people you have not met. There are dreams you have not pursued. There is a life beyond the emotional maze, and you do not have to know every step today. You only need to stop walking away from yourself, one step, one boundary, one honest decision, one day at a time. That is how freedom begins. Not with revenge, not with an explanation, not with their apology, with you, with the moment you finally say, I matter too. With the moment you realize, my peace matters. With the moment you understand, I do not have to earn basic respect. With the moment you decide, I will not keep sacrificing myself to preserve a relationship that repeatedly destroys me. And from that moment forward, your healing becomes your responsibility. Not because what happened was your fault. It wasn't. But because your future belongs to you. And you get to decide what happens next. So breathe, stand up inside yourself. Take back your attention. Take back your boundaries. Take back your time. Take back your voice. Take back your dreams. Take back the parts of yourself you abandoned while trying to keep someone else happy. And remember, you are not difficult because you need respect. You are not selfish because you have limits. You are not weak because you became attached. You are not foolish because you hoped. You are not broken because you are healing. You are a human being who learned something painful. And now you get to use that knowledge. You get to choose differently. You get to love differently. You get to live differently. You get to walk forward without carrying the responsibility of fixing another person on your back. And perhaps the greatest victory will not be when they realize what they lost. The greatest victory will be when you realize what you almost lost. And this time, you choose not to lose yourself again.